What happens when a single piece of forgotten jewelry can expose the foundation of America's most powerful banking empire? For Amanda Parker, a 31-year-old hotel housekeeper struggling to support her disabled sister, that piece was a vintage diamond bracelet hidden in her late mother's belongings. For Charles Montgomery, the banking magnate whose financial institutions controlled half the country's mortgage market, it was a relic from his family's past that threatened to reveal the blood-soaked origins of their fortune. She was just cleaning the penthouse suite of the city's most exclusive hotel. He was just another wealthy guest, accustomed to invisible service. But when her mother's diamond bracelet caught on his briefcase during housekeeping, revealing an engraved family motto that matched the one on his letterhead, both their worlds would shatter like crystal. This isn't a story about chance encounters. This is about how a moment of recognition can ignite a wildfire that consumes generations of carefully buried secrets, and how sometimes the past refuses to stay dead. The marble floors of the Grandview Hotel's penthouse level gleamed under the soft LED lighting, reflecting the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, the luxury suites hummed with the quiet efficiency of five-star service, where discretion was worth more than gold and privacy was the ultimate luxury. Amanda Parker pushed her housekeeping cart down the hallway with practiced silence, her navy uniform crisp despite the exhausting double shift she'd pulled the night before. Every step sent aches through her body from working 3 jobs, but her sister Katie's medical equipment and specialized care weren't going to pay for themselves. The progressive muscle disease had left Katie wheelchair-bound and completely dependent. And Amanda's wages from the hotel, the laundromat, and weekend catering were all that kept them from the nightmare of inadequate state assistance. The antique diamond bracelet on her wrist had belonged to her mother, Elena Parker, who had died in a car accident when Amanda was 16. It was an elegant Art Deco piece, 7 connected diamond clusters, each surrounding a small sapphire with an intricate clasp bearing an engraved family crest. Despite the bracelet's obvious value and her desperate financial circumstances, Amanda had never been able to sell it. Her mother had made her promise to keep it always, whispering with her dying breath that it was proof of something important that must never be forgotten. In the presidential suite, a man in his 70s sat at an antique mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly reports from his banking empire. Charles Montgomery was distinguished and imposing, with silver hair and eyes like winter ice. His charcoal suit was hand-tailored, and the Mont Blanc pen in his hand probably cost more than Amanda earned in 3 months. He controlled the largest network of private banks and mortgage companies in the country, with the power to approve or destroy entire communities with a single decision. As Amanda entered to refresh the towels and restock the minibar, her exhaustion finally betrayed her. The thick Persian rug caught her shoe, sending her stumbling toward the desk. She caught herself against the leather briefcase, but her bracelet snagged on the metal clasp, the vintage catch finally giving way under the strain. The bracelet tumbled onto the polished desk with a crystalline chime. Charles Montgomery looked up from his reports, and his ice-blue eyes fixed on the fallen jewelry with an expression of absolute horror. The color drained from his face as if he had witnessed a resurrection. "Where did you get that bracelet?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Amanda's heart hammered against her ribs. "It was my mother's, sir, Elena Parker. She left it to me when she died." Montgomery's hand moved to the letterhead on his desk, his fingers tracing the embossed family crest with trembling recognition. The same intricate design, a crowned eagle grasping a key surrounded by Latin text, adorned both the bracelet's clasp and his business correspondence. "Elena Parker," he repeated, the name falling from his lips like a curse. "What was her maiden name?" "Volkov," Amanda replied, confused by his intense reaction. "Elena Volkov, before she married my father." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the luxury suite felt suddenly oppressive, filled with the weight of unspoken secrets. Elena Volkov died 30 years ago, Montgomery whispered finally. She was a financial analyst. She was killed in a car bombing outside our Chicago headquarters. The words hit Amanda like physical blows. That's impossible. My mother lived until I was 16. She told me stories about her work in banking, about discovering something terrible that powerful people wanted hidden forever. Montgomery's breathing became labored. What did she tell you about that? Amanda glanced toward the door, suddenly aware of how isolated they were in the penthouse suite. She said she had found evidence that a major bank was laundering money for organized crime, that they were using depositors' funds to finance drug trafficking and murder. She had to disappear because they promised to kill her entire family if she testified. The banker's face went ashen. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Bank Analyst Killed in Car Bomb. Volkov Family Mourns Tragic Loss." Below the headline was a photograph of a young woman with intelligent eyes and a determined expression. She bore a striking resemblance to Amanda, particularly around the jawline and the stubborn set of her mouth. "Elena Volkov," Montgomery said, his voice breaking. "Daughter of Russian immigrants, brilliant financial analyst, and the woman whose testimony would have destroyed my family's empire 30 years ago." Amanda studied the photograph, her mind reeling. The woman in the picture could have been her twin, separated by 3 decades. "If Elena Volkov is my mother," Amanda said slowly, "and she was investigating your family's bank, then you're not just some housekeeper who stumbled into my suite," Montgomery replied, his voice hollow with realization. "You're the daughter of the woman whose murder launched the modern phase of my family's criminal enterprise. You're living proof that our greatest crime wasn't buried as completely as we believed." The diamond bracelet lay between them on the mahogany desk, its facetted stones catching the light like tears. It was more than jewelry. It was evidence, a witness to crimes that had shaped decades of financial corruption. But Elena Volkov hadn't died in that car bombing. She had escaped, disappeared, built a new life under a new identity. And now her daughter stood in the heart of the empire that had tried to destroy her, wearing the proof that could bring down a dynasty built on blood money. The following afternoon, Amanda found herself in Charles Montgomery's private study at his estate in the Hamptons, a mansion that represented generations of banking wealth, accumulated through increasingly questionable means. The room was lined with first-edition books and photographs of the Montgomery family, with presidents and foreign dignitaries. "I need to show you something," Montgomery said, his voice heavy with 3 decades of suppressed guilt. He moved to a hidden safe behind a portrait of his grandfather, the founder of Montgomery Banking Group. He withdrew a thick file folder and spread its contents across his leather-topped desk. Inside were FBI surveillance photos, financial records, and correspondence that made Amanda's blood run cold. "The truth about what happened in 1993, Montgomery began, is that Elena discovered we were laundering money for the Kozlov crime family, hundreds of millions in drug proceeds, arms-dealing profits, and human trafficking revenue were flowing through our accounts disguised as legitimate business investments." Amanda picked up one of the financial reports, her hands shaking as she read her mother's meticulous documentation of the money laundering scheme. "She tried to report it to the authorities." "She did more than try," Montgomery said bitterly. "She had compiled irrefutable evidence that would have sent my father and half our board of directors to federal prison for life. She was scheduled to testify before a grand jury the week after the bombing. Her testimony would have destroyed our bank and exposed decades of criminal partnerships." He pulled out a series of internal memos marked "Urgent, Eyes Only" that detailed the family's plan to eliminate Elena before she could testify. "The car bomb wasn't random violence," Amanda said, the horrible truth crystallizing in her mind. "My father ordered it," Montgomery confirmed, his voice cracking. "He contracted with the same crime family we were laundering money for. They owed us enough favors to eliminate one troublesome analyst." Amanda thought of her mother's nightmares. The way she would sometimes wake up screaming about fire and metal. The paranoia that had followed them from city to city throughout Amanda's childhood. But she survived, Amanda said softly. Somehow, yes. She must have gotten suspicious and switched cars with a colleague, or maybe she was running late. When the bomb went off, it killed a junior analyst who had borrowed Elena's car. In the chaos and flames, everyone assumed Elena was the victim. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. How much money did you launder? Montgomery closed his eyes. Over the past 30 years, billions. The Kozlov organization became our largest client, and we expanded to work with cartels in Mexico, arms dealers in Eastern Europe, and human traffickers throughout Asia. Elena's supposed death became the cautionary tale that kept other employees from asking questions. And your banking empire was built on financing the worst crimes imaginable, Amanda said, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. Every mortgage we've approved, every small business loan, every family savings account, it's all been subsidized by blood money, Montgomery admitted. I've spent 30 years trying to find ways to atone, but I was too much of a coward to expose the truth. Before Amanda could respond, the study door burst open. A man in his 40s entered without knocking, his expensive suit unable to disguise the cold calculation in his eyes. Behind him came a woman of similar age, her designer clothing and perfect makeup creating an armor of corporate respectability. Father, the man said, his voice sharp with suspicion. Mrs. Chen from the hotel called. She said you had requested private access to surveillance footage from the penthouse level. How unusual. Richard, Montgomery said, his tone immediately defensive. This is Amanda Parker. Amanda, my son Richard Montgomery, and my daughter Julia Montgomery Cross. Julia's calculating gaze swept over Amanda's modest clothing with barely concealed contempt. And what brings Miss Parker to our family home? Amanda is Elena Volkov's daughter, Montgomery said simply. The effect was electric. Both siblings went rigid, and Richard actually stepped backward. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. That's impossible, Julia breathed. Elena Volkov died in the car bombing. It was 30 years ago. Apparently she survived, Montgomery replied. She changed her identity and built a new life. Amanda is living proof that the family's darkest secret wasn't buried as completely as we thought. Richard found his voice first, his tone sharp with panic. This is insane. Some random hotel worker shows up with a piece of jewelry and a wild story, and you're ready to confess to crimes that happened before she was born. She's obviously running a blackmail operation. The bracelet is authentic, Montgomery said coldly. It matches the one in Elena's personnel file photograph, and her story explains inconsistencies about that night that have never made sense. Julia moved closer to the desk, studying the documents with the intensity of a corporate predator calculating damage control. Even if this fantasy were true, she said slowly, it changes nothing legally. Elena Volkov has no standing. She was never part of this family. But her daughter might have a moral claim to justice, Montgomery said quietly. The words detonated like a bomb in the quiet study. Julia's composed mask cracked, revealing the naked greed underneath. What exactly are you suggesting, Father? Richard demanded, his voice rising. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time this family faced the consequences of our crimes. Maybe it's time we made restitution for the lives that were destroyed by our money laundering. Restitution. Julia laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to destroy our family's reputation based on the delusions of some opportunistic stranger. I want to stop living with the knowledge that our wealth is built on financing murder, trafficking, and every other form of human misery imaginable. Montgomery shot back. The tension in the room was suffocating. Amanda could see the cold calculation in both siblings' eyes as they assessed how this revelation threatened not just their inheritance, but their own positions in the financial world. I think, Julia said with dangerous calm, that we need to be very careful about entertaining unsubstantiated claims from outsiders. The Montgomery family name represents generations of financial integrity. It would be tragic if our reputation were damaged by someone with questionable motives. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Amanda felt the same chill her mother must have experienced all those years ago when powerful people decided she was too dangerous to live. "Are you threatening her?" Montgomery asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm protecting this family," Julia replied smoothly, "as someone should have done 30 years ago." Amanda realized with growing horror that she had walked into the same trap that had nearly killed her mother. The Montgomery family's willingness to commit murder to protect their criminal partnerships hadn't ended with the elder Montgomery. It had simply evolved into more sophisticated forms of destruction. The war for the truth had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Over the following weeks, the attacks were precise and devastating. Amanda's position at the Grandview Hotel was eliminated due to budget restructuring. Her sister Katie's insurance suddenly required additional medical review that suspended her benefits indefinitely. Amanda's credit cards were cancelled due to irregular activity, and her bank account was frozen pending investigation of suspicious transactions when she found a letter in her mailbox offering to purchase her mother's bracelet for an exceptional sum, with no signature or return address. She knew the full weight of the Montgomery financial machine was being brought to bear against her. Charles Montgomery, meanwhile, was conducting his own investigation into the scope of his family's money laundering operations. Using his access to internal bank records, he uncovered evidence that the criminal partnerships had grown far beyond what he had originally known. "It's not just the Kozlov family anymore," he told Amanda during a clandestine meeting in Central Park. "We're now laundering money for organizations in over 30 countries. Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers, even terrorist groups." Elena stumbled onto just the tip of an iceberg that's gotten massive over the past 3 decades. "How much are we talking about?" Amanda asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Tens of billions annually. And it's not just Montgomery banking anymore. Richard and Julia have expanded the operation through their other business ventures: real estate development, private equity, international consulting. They've built an entire ecosystem of financial crime." The revelation was staggering in its scope. Amanda was beginning to understand that her mother hadn't just discovered a single money laundering scheme. She had stumbled onto a systematic corruption of the entire financial system that had shaped global organized crime for decades. The breaking point came when Amanda arrived at the care facility to find her sister being discharged against medical advice. The head administrator explained apologetically that there had been questions raised about the legitimacy of Katie's diagnosis and treatment needs. "I don't understand," Amanda said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Her condition is progressive muscle disease. It's been documented by specialists for years. Her equipment is literally keeping her alive. There's been a review of her case," the administrator said uncomfortably. "Questions about whether she truly requires this level of specialized care." "I'm sorry, Miss Parker. The decision has been made." Amanda knew with absolute certainty who was behind this. She also knew that her sister, in her current condition, wouldn't survive being moved to an underfunded public facility without proper equipment. That night, she called Charles Montgomery from a payphone outside the facility. "They're going to kill her," she said without preamble. "Just like they tried to kill Elena." "Who? What happened?" She told him about the discharge, the insurance problems, the systematic destruction of everything she had worked to build for her sister. As she spoke, she could hear Montgomery's breathing grow harsh with rage. 30 years, he said finally. 30 years, and they're still using the same tactics. Still destroying innocent lives to protect their criminal empire. "I can't fight them," Amanda said, her voice breaking. "I don't have their resources, their connections." "But you have something they don't," Montgomery interrupted. "You have the truth, and you have me. I've been a coward for 3 decades, but I won't be one anymore. Are you ready to finish what your mother started?" Amanda thought of Elena's final words to her. The truth always finds a way to surface, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes the right person to bring it to light. Yes, she said, her voice steady with newfound determination. Tell me what we need to do. The annual International Banking Summit was held in the gleaming towers of the World Financial Center, where representatives from the world's largest financial institutions gathered to discuss global monetary policy. It was the most important banking event of the year, where trillion-dollar decisions were made and the future of international finance was shaped. Amanda had never imagined she would enter such a place. The building's glass and steel architecture represented the pinnacle of financial power, and she felt like an intruder in the professional attire Montgomery had insisted she wear. "This is where it ends," he had told her during their final planning session. "In front of everyone who has benefited from our family's crimes." Richard and Julia worked the summit with practiced skill, their corporate smiles never faltering, even as they kept careful watch on their father. They had grown increasingly concerned about his erratic behavior in recent weeks, his obsession with ancient family history, and most disturbing of all, his growing alliance with the hotel worker who claimed to be connected to a woman who had died decades ago. The summit's main session proceeded normally through the morning panels and networking lunch. Banking executives and government regulators congratulated themselves on their collaborative efforts to maintain global financial stability while carefully avoiding any mention of the massive money laundering operations that had made their wealth possible. But when Charles Montgomery took the podium for his scheduled keynote address on international banking security, something was different in his demeanor, a tension that suggested the afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, "today I want to talk to you about the true cost of financial prosperity." A murmur ran through the distinguished audience. This wasn't the expected speech about regulatory cooperation and market stability. 30 years ago, Montgomery continued, my family made a decision that has haunted me ever since. To protect our profits and silence a whistleblower, we orchestrated the murder of a brilliant analyst who tried to expose the truth about our money laundering operations. The murmur grew to shocked gasps. Julia was pushing through the crowd toward the stage, her face pale with panic. The woman who died trying to protect the integrity of our financial system was named Elena Volkov. She was an analyst at Montgomery Banking Group, and she had compiled irrefutable evidence that we were laundering billions for international crime syndicates. A spotlight found Amanda in the audience. She lifted her chin, meeting Montgomery's gaze across the auditorium with steady resolve. But Elena Volkov didn't die in that car bombing. She survived, changed her identity, and spent the rest of her life in hiding, too afraid to come forward with the truth that could have saved countless lives. Julia reached the side of the stage and was frantically gesturing to the event coordinator, trying to get him to cut the microphone. But like everyone else in the auditorium, the coordinator was transfixed by the unfolding confession. "Today," Montgomery said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm proud to introduce Elena Volkov's daughter, Amanda Parker, who has helped me uncover the full scope of our family's crimes against global financial security." The auditorium erupted in chaos. Some attendees were applauding, others were arguing loudly, and several banking executives were heading for the exits. But Montgomery wasn't finished. "I'm also announcing that I've discovered evidence of ongoing criminal activity within my own family. My children have expanded our money laundering operations to include terrorist financing, arms dealing, and human trafficking on a global scale." He looked directly at Richard and Julia, who had both gone white as paper. "This evidence has been turned over to federal prosecutors, international banking regulators, and Interpol. Anyone involved in this decades-long conspiracy against global financial security will be held accountable." Julia's corporate composure finally shattered completely. "You delusional old fool!" she screamed, her voice carrying even without amplification. She's nothing but an extortionist. And nobody trying to destroy our family's legacy. Legacy? Montgomery's voice cut through her hysteria. What legacy, Julia? The legacy of blood money? The legacy of financing every form of human misery on the planet? He gestured to Amanda, who was walking toward the stage with her head held high despite the hundreds of eyes upon her. Elena Volkov was 31 when she discovered that the bank she worked for was financing mass murder and human trafficking. Montgomery continued as Amanda joined him at the podium. She chose human dignity over personal security, justice over comfort. She gave up everything, her name, her career, her future, to try to protect innocent people from the crimes we were financing. His voice broke with 3 decades of suppressed emotion. I can't give Elena back the life she lost. I can't undo 30 years of hiding and fear. But I can make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. He turned to Amanda, taking her hands in his. I can't replace your mother, and I can't erase the struggles your family has faced because of mine. But I can promise you this, the Montgomery name will never again be used to finance crime or harm innocent people. He faced the stunned assembly once more. Effective immediately, I'm liquidating all Montgomery financial holdings and turning over complete records of our money laundering operations to international authorities. The proceeds will fund a new foundation dedicated to combating financial crime and supporting the victims of organized criminal activity. The auditorium had fallen into stunned silence. Even Julia stood frozen, realizing that her father's public confession had destroyed any chance of containing the scandal or maintaining their financial empire. Amanda felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked out at the crowd of banking executives and government officials. These were the people who had shaped global finance for generations, untouchable in their wealth and influence. But today, for the first time in her life, she felt their equal. My mother, Elena, used to tell me that money laundering isn't a victimless crime, she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. She said that every dollar we help criminals hide is a dollar that funds someone's murder, someone's enslavement, someone's destruction. She said that someday someone would have the courage to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. She looked at Richard and Julia, who stood amid the wreckage of their carefully constructed financial empire. Today is that someday. The aftermath of the banking summit sent shockwaves through financial markets worldwide. Richard and Julia were arrested within hours on charges ranging from money laundering to conspiracy to commit murder. The investigation that followed uncovered the largest financial crime network in history, with tentacles reaching into governments, banks, and criminal organizations across 6 continents. The revelation about Elena Volkov's murder triggered international banking reforms that established new protocols for detecting and preventing money laundering. The Montgomery financial empire, built on the foundation of criminal partnerships, faced complete destruction and billions in fines. But from the ashes of the old regime, something meaningful began to emerge. 1 year after the summit, Amanda stood in the marble lobby of the Elena Volkov Center for Financial Crime Prevention, watching as investigators and advocates prepared for the facility's grand opening. Her sister Katie, her condition stabilized thanks to experimental treatments the new foundation had funded, sat nearby in her wheelchair, her eyes bright with hope for the first time in years. She would have been so proud, Katie said, gesturing to the bustling activity around them. Mom always said that every victim of financial crime deserves someone to fight for justice on their behalf. The center would provide investigation services, victim advocacy, and support for law enforcement agencies combating international financial crime. It was the first of many projects funded by the liquidated Montgomery fortune, now dedicated to protecting the people the family had spent generations helping to exploit. Charles Montgomery, now stripped of his banking licenses and facing his own legal proceedings, approached from across the lobby, moving with the careful steps of a man who had carried guilt for 30 years, but was finally learning to transform it into purpose. "The dedication ceremony is about to begin," he said, offering Amanda his arm. "Ready to honor your mother's memory properly?" Amanda smiled, touching the diamond bracelet at her wrist, the same piece that had started this extraordinary journey. She had learned that the family motto engraved on the clasp read, "Veritas et Justitia," truth and justice. "I think she's been waiting for this day for 30 years, Amanda said, as they walked toward the auditorium where hundreds of crime victims and their families waited. Not wealthy donors this time, but the people whose lives would be protected by Elena's legacy. Montgomery squeezed her arm gently. She raised a daughter who finished what she started. As Amanda stepped up to address the crowd, she thought about the incredible journey that had brought her here, from a struggling hotel housekeeper to the heir of a legacy built on her mother's courage, and finally to someone who could transform that legacy into something Elena would have been proud of. The truth had indeed surfaced, just as her mother had always believed it would, and in its wake had come not just justice, but the rarest gift of all, the chance to turn a story of tragedy into a testament to the power of one person's refusal to let criminal corruption prevail. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected the struggles of crime victims everywhere, Amanda began her speech with the words her mother had whispered to her so many years ago: "Money laundering isn't a victimless crime." Today, we're not just opening an investigation center, we're proving that no amount of wealth or power can keep the truth buried forever. In the audience, she could see Montgomery wiping away tears, and she knew that somewhere Elena Volkov was finally at peace. Her battle against financial corruption hadn't ended in defeat after all. It had just taken 30 years to find its way to victory. The story of Amanda Parker and Charles Montgomery reminds us that the courage to expose institutional corruption can echo across generations. Sometimes it takes an outsider with nothing to lose to show us that our greatest weapon against financial crime isn't money or connections, but the simple refusal to let truth remain buried. Elena Volkov never got to see the banking empire that silenced her transformed into a force for financial justice and crime prevention. But through her daughter, her unwavering commitment to financial integrity became the foundation of a new kind of legacy, one that proved the most powerful force against money laundering is simply refusing to let it remain hidden. What would you have done in Amanda's place? Would you have had the courage to challenge a financial dynasty, even knowing it could cost you everything you held dear? If this story moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of ordinary people to hold financial institutions accountable. Don't forget to follow our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of truth over corruption and justice over greed. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are fought not with money or influence, but with the simple determination to honor the dead by protecting the living. Thank you for listening to this tale of courage, sacrifice, and the incredible power of one person's refusal to let financial crime be forgotten.